There's a phrase that I think everyone just inherently knows. It's almost a reflex at this point.
Right, yeah. The oldest profession.
Exactly. You mentioned prostitution, and someone inevitably chimes in with, well, it's the oldest profession. It's a cliche. It's a punchline. But it's also a way of just shutting down the conversation entirely.
It implies that trading sex for money is just this inevitable, immutable part of the human condition.
Right. But looking at the stack of research we've pulled for today's deep dive, I think we have a much more provocative question to start your morning with.
It really is the question that changes everything about how you view this entire topic. Is it actually a profession? Or is it a biological survival strategy that predates humanity entirely?
And that's the hook for today, because we aren't just looking at history books. We're going on a bit of a field trip for you.
We are.
We're going to look at penguins in Antarctica, spiders in the garden, and our closest relatives in the jungle. Our mission today is to answer one specific question. Is trading sex for resources a unique human endeavor? Or are we just doing a more complicated industrialized version of what animals have been doing for millions of years?
It is such a fascinating area of study.
Hmm.
But to do this fairly and to really get the most out of these sources, we have to do something difficult right off the bat.
Reframe the terms?
Yes. We have to drop the word prostitution. It comes with a massive amount of baggage. Moral, legal, religious baggage. If we want to look at this objectively, through the lens of biology and behavioral ecology, we need a neutral term.
And the literature
The
uses
sexual economic exchange.
sexual economic exchange. I mean, it sounds a bit clinical,
It does.
but I can see why it's necessary. It strips away the judgment and just looks at the mechanics of the act.
Precisely. It simply describes an interaction where sexual access is traded for material resources. So that could be food, protection, nesting materials, or distinct objects. And once you use that definition, the argument that this is exclusively human starts to fall apart very quickly.
So let's establish that biological baseline, because when I think of animals mating, I usually think of, courtship dances or rams butting heads, raw instinct. I don't think of a transaction. I certainly don't think of payment.
No, most people don't.
But the sources point us immediately to Antarctica,
To the Adélie penguin.
which, to be fair, usually appear very wholesome in the documentaries. Not the ones in the little tuxedos waddling around.
They do look dapper, yes. But their economy is absolutely ruthless. You have to understand the environment first.
Right, the ice.
Adélie penguins nest on rocky, frozen ground. If they lay their eggs directly on the ice or in the mud, the eggs freeze or they drown in melt water. The chicks die.
Wow.
So to build a viable nest, they need stones, specifically date-sized stones.
So in this economy, stones are the currency. They're the Bitcoin of the Antarctic.
They are the absolute currency. They're scarce, and they are vital for reproductive success. Now, researchers Fiona Hunter and Lloyd Davis spent years observing these colonies. They watched monogamous pairs, which is the standard for penguins, trying to build these nests. But they noticed a very specific behavior in about 10% of the females.
This is the side hustle.
In a way, yeah. A female would slip away from her own nest, waddle over to a single male who had managed to stockpile a nice pile of rocks, and she would initiate a courtship ritual.
Okay.
She bows, she engages in copulation with him, and immediately after the act, she grabs a stone from his nest and runs back to her own.
She pays with sex, and her change is a rock.
That is the transaction. And for some females, it wasn't a one-time thing. The researchers documented females returning to the same male multiple times, essentially trading sex for up to 10 stones to build up their own nest.
That creates a conflict, though, right? Because she has a partner back at the nest. Is he just watching this happen?
He's usually guarding the existing stones. But from an evolutionary standpoint, this is a massive win for the female. She gets the resources, the stones, which ensures her chicks survive. But she also gets what biologists call genetic insurance.
Which is?
Well, if her primary partner turns out to be infertile, she's just secured a backup source of DNA.
So she's diversifying her portfolio.
Exactly.
But there was a detail in the study that really made me laugh, even though it's incredibly deceptive. The heist.
Ah, yes. This is where the concept of biological fraud enters the picture. Hunter and Davis watched some females initiate the ritual. The bowing, the flirting. They get the male ready to go, and then right before he can actually mount her, she grabs the stone and bolts.
She just took the money and ran.
She did, and she was efficient about it. One particularly ambitious female was clocked grabbing 62 stones in a single hour using this method. She was playing the market perfectly.
That is honestly, that's impressive. I mean, it completely shatters the idea that animals only have sex for direct reproduction. She's using sexual availability as a tool to get paid. It's completely calculated.
It's a pure calculation of cost versus benefit. And it's not just sophisticated birds doing this. If you want to see a really high-stakes version of this transaction, we have to look at invertebrates, specifically the nursery web spider, the Passora mirabilis.
I'm assuming their currency isn't stones.
No, definitely not. For them, it's food. We call it a nuptial gift. You see, in the spider world, mating is incredibly dangerous for males. Females are often larger, they're more aggressive, and they're very hungry. If a male just walks up to say hello, there's a very high chance he's going to get eaten before he can mate.
So the gift is basically a bribe, like, please eat this fly instead of me.
It's a shield and a distraction. The male catches a fly or an insect, wraps it up in layers of silk and presents it to the female. While she's busy unwrapping and eating the gift, he transfers his sperm.
Strictly transactional.
Entirely. The bigger the gift, the longer she eats, and the more sperm he can transfer.
So if there's no gift, there's no sex.
Worse, no gift and you become dinner. It's literally life or death. But again, just like the penguins, we see the evolution of deceit here. There's a related spider, the Paradocinus longipes. The males sometimes cheat the system.
How so?
They'll wrap up a piece of inedible trash, like an empty exoskeleton of an ant or a twig, and they wrap it in this beautiful pheromone-laced silk.
Oh, wow. He gives her an empty box wrapped in fancy paper.
Exactly. They hand over this worthless package. The female smells the silk. Her sensory bias says gift, and she accepts it. By the time she unwraps it and realizes she's been scammed, he's already finished the deed and run off.
That implies that the female is wired to respond to the transaction itself. The payment, or at least the appearance of payment, is the key that unlocks the behavior.
It is. And this brings us much closer to home. Because when we look at primates, our closest relatives, we see the cognitive architecture for what looks a lot like human prostitution.
This is the meat for sex hypothesis from the sources.
That's the one. Researchers in the Thai National Park in Côte d'Ivoire studied wild chimpanzees over a long period. Now, meat is a luxury item for chimps. It's high calorie and it's really hard to get. The males do the hunting. The data showed that males who shared meat with females had exactly twice the mating success of those who didn't.
Twice the success. I mean, that's a massive return on investment in evolutionary terms.
Huge. But we do need to be careful with the distinction here. In the wild, among chimps, this is usually a long-term thing. It's not a vending machine where you put in a steak and get sex immediately. It's a relationship-building strategy. I provide for you, you provide for me.
Right.
However, when we put monkeys in a lab environment, things get very literal very fast.
Oh, the Yale capuchin study. This is one of my favorite weird science stories.
It's iconic for a reason. Researchers taught capuchin monkeys to use silver discs as money. They learned that a disc could be traded for a treat, like a grape or a slice of apple.
Fiat currency for monkeys. They actually understood the symbolic value of the coin.
Exactly. And once the monkeys understood the concept of money, something happened spontaneously. The researchers didn't teach this part. One male monkey gave a coin to a female.
Oh.
She took the coin, allowed him to mate with her, and then immediately turned around and handed the coin to the researcher to buy a grape.
That is undeniable. Nobody taught them to do that at all.
No, they figured it out completely on their own. The male wanted sex, the female wanted a grape, and the coin bridged the gap. It proves that the cognitive leap, using a symbolic token to pay for a body, isn't some complex cultural invention we came up with. It's sitting right there in the primate brain.
So let's recap where we are. We have penguins trading stones, spiders trading fake gifts, and monkeys inventing cash for sex economies. It seems pretty clear that the transaction part is natural, the hardware is there, but humans, we make things complicated. We don't just have transactions, we have an industry.
We do. And that is where we have to shift from biology to evolutionary psychology. Why does this market exist in the human species specifically? It comes down to a concept called reproductive asymmetry.
Which is a fancy way of saying men and women have different stakes in the game.
Biologically, yes. Historically, for a woman, sex carried a massive potential cost. 9 months of pregnancy, lactation, raising a child, it's a very high investment activity. For a man, biologically speaking, the investment can be minutes. Cheap sperm versus expensive eggs.
So this creates a supply and demand imbalance right out of the gate.
Right. Evolutionary strategies theory suggests men evolved a dual strategy. 1, find a long-term partner to raise kids with. 2, seek short-term variety to spread genes widely. That second drive, the demand for variety with low commitment, is the engine of the sex trade.
And when you look at the modern world, who are the people driving that demand? I was reading about the dark tetrad in the research regarding clients. It sounds like a supervillain team, but it's actually a psychological profile.
It is, and it's a dark shift from the penguins. The research suggests that men who frequent street-level prostitution often score high on the dark tetrad. That's narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and sadism. The key correlation here is a lack of empathy. They don't want a partner. They want a commodity.
The penguin is just trying to get a rock for a nest. This feels colder. It feels like objectification in the truest sense.
It is. And modern life makes it easier. This is what we call evolutionary mismatch. We evolved in small tribes where everyone knew everyone. You couldn't just treat someone like an object and get away with it. There were social consequences.
Because everyone would know.
Exactly. But now, we live in anonymous cities with millions of strangers. It allows those ancient short-term mating drives to run wild without the social checks and balances.
So we have the biological impulse, but animals don't have brothels. They don't have laws about this. They don't have a red light district.
And that is the crux of the argument. If we ask, do animals trade sex for resources? The answer is yes. But if we ask, do animals have prostitution? The answer is no, because prostitution is an institution, and humans are the only ones who institutionalize things.
When did that happen? When did we turn a transaction into an industry?
It aligns with the agrarian revolution. When we started farming, suddenly humans had property. We had land to pass down. Men wanted to ensure their land went to their biological kids, so they started controlling female sexuality strictly.
The good wife versus the other woman.
Exactly. You create a class of women for inheritance and a class of women for pleasure, and the state got involved immediately. Look at ancient Greece. Solon, the famous lawmaker, actually established state-funded brothels in Athens.
Wait, state-funded, so the government was essentially the pimp.
Effectively, yes. And get this, he used the profits from selling women's bodies to build a temple to Aphrodite.
The irony is palpable there, profiting off the trade to honor the goddess of love.
It gets even more complex in Rome. We often think of Rome as this debauched free-for-all, and it was legal to buy sex. But the status of the people involved was horrific. They were labeled infames.
Infames. That sounds like infamous.
It means without reputation. It was a legal death. If you were a sex worker or a pimp, you had no rights. You couldn't vote. You couldn't testify in court. But the crucial part about Rome, and this is a key human difference, is that it was industrial-scale exploitation based on slavery.
Right.
Most of those women and men were slaves. You could buy a person, force them to have sex for your profit, and it was perfectly legal. No animal does that. A male penguin can't force a female to go get stones for him.
That is a really important distinction for you to keep in mind. The penguin transaction is voluntary. Even if it is transactional, the Roman model is pure coercion.
Precisely. And speaking of history, we need to bust a major myth here. You always hear about sacred prostitution, right? The idea that in Babylon or Corinth, priestesses would have sex with strangers to bless the crops.
Yeah, I definitely learned that in school. The idea that it was this holy ritual, it paints a very romantic picture of the ancient world.
It turns out that is almost certainly false. Historian Stephanie Boudin did an exhaustive study on this. She combed through the actual texts and economic records of these cultures. There is virtually no evidence that this actually happened.
So where did the story come from?
Herodotus,
Okay.
the Greek historian. He essentially made it up. He wanted to portray the Babylonians as decadent and other. So he wrote this propaganda that they forced their women to sell themselves.
Wow. So even the concept of prostitution was used as a weapon.
Exactly. We weaponized the idea of it to make our enemies look immoral. That is uniquely human. Animals don't write smear campaigns.
So we've moved from biology to history. Now let's talk about today. Because when we look at the modern apparatus of sex work, there's one factor that seems to stand out as the ultimate human invention.
The middleman.
The third party.
This is the single biggest difference between human prostitution and animal sexual economic exchange. In nature, it's dyadic. Face-to-face, penguin to penguin, chimp to chimp. In the human world, we have inserted a third party who extracts value. Pimps, traffickers, brothel owners.
And this changes the power dynamic completely.
Completely. It introduces systematic coercion. We see things like the lover boy method, where a trafficker feigns romance to entrap a victim, then forces them into the trade. Or even spiritual coercion. In some trafficking networks from West Africa, the sources mention they use juju, voodoo curses, to terrify victims into compliance. They believe if they escape, They or their families will die supernaturally.
That is terrifying, and it is so far removed from the chimp trading meat, it's psychological warfare.
It is, and it creates a legal nightmare. Because we have this biological drive, the buyer meeting this exploitative machinery, the pimp, and the law doesn't know what to do.
Right, because the sources show every country handles it differently. It feels like no one has figured out the right answer.
It's chaos. You have the Nordic model in places like Sweden, where they arrest the buyer but not the seller, trying to kill the demand. Then you have New Zealand, which fully decriminalized it, treating it like any other business to try and protect the workers' rights. And then you have the US, where it's mostly criminalized, which drives it underground and makes it more dangerous.
It seems like we're constantly fighting between viewing it as work and viewing it as exploitation, and the laws reflect that deep divide.
And that cognitive dissonance is also uniquely human. A spider doesn't feel shame. A penguin doesn't worry about the morality of trading sex for a stone. We have wrapped this biological act in layers of stigma, religion, law, and economics. We are the only species that sells sex, but we're also the only species that hates ourselves for it.
So let's try to land this plane. We started with the question, is prostitution a unique human endeavor?
And the verdict is a split decision.
Okay, give it to me. Summarize the case.
If you define it simply as exchanging sex for resources, then no. It is absolutely not unique to humans. It is a standard cross-species evolutionary strategy. The hardware is in our DNA, just like it is in the chimps. The urge to trade resources for access is foundational to nature. But if you define it as an institution, a system involving fiat currency, third-party exploitation, coercion, and moral stigmatization, then yes, it is uniquely human. We took a biological impulse and built a factory of exploitation around it.
It's astonishing, really. We often think of animalistic behavior as the violent or chaotic stuff. But in this case, the animal version is actually the simpler, more straightforward transaction. The human version is the one that introduced the cruelty of the middleman and the shame of the stigma.
That is the tragedy of it. Biology gave us the transaction. Humanity invented the exploitation.
That is a heavy thought to leave you with, but an important one. We didn't invent the impulse, but we absolutely own the system we built around it. Does knowing that the core drive is natural make the industry easier to understand? Or does the addition of human coercion make it even more tragic? Something for you to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.